with our first poll. Welcome to the art and magic of option generation.
Yeah.
All right, so poll number 1. How important do you think option generation is in resolving family law disputes? You'll see it pop up right now. So A, extremely important. B, very important. C, moderately important. D, slightly important, or not important at all. This is interesting.
I know what my vote is.
Not important at all. End of presentation. Goodbye, everyone.
This is the section where we just sit and have drinks and hang out with
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, I wasn't told I was allowed to have wine at this presentation. I went and got Starbucks.
The wine is for after, Carrie.
Oh, very good. Okay. As long as I'm allowed after, that's okay.
All right. Why do we
No one
see?
believes it's Starbucks. No one.
That's the best thing about the Starbucks cups. This is clear glass. You can see what's in here, but
Do we know, Michelle?
Straight vodka.
All right. So extremely important, very important, moderately important. So we've got 41% of us think it's extremely important, 38% very important, and 18% moderately important. Only 2 people think it's slightly important. So why don't we move on to the experts and see what you guys have to say?
Yeah. For me, I think it is extremely important that we have option generation, and I don't really think it matters what process you're in. So if you're in an alternative dispute resolution process like collaborative mediation, or if you're in litigation, you need to have options. I said it earlier, you know, most of our judges are now collaboratively trained, and they're looking for everybody to be coming to the table and finding ways to resolve this so that the family can move forward. It's not one size fits all. It can't be.
No, you're absolutely right, Carrie. And I think the most important point you made there is that it's a very important process, no matter what type of process you're picking. It's good for mediation, it's good for collaborative, it's good for litigation. You know, judges want clients to settle their disputes out of trial, and if you can generate a lot of options and pick one, you're going to make your judge very happy. You're going to save yourself a lot of money, and if you're a professional, you're going to save your clients a lot of money and a lot of stress for yourself as well.
Absolutely.
I agree with both of you. And I think that sometimes the best options are ones that kind of, combine the 2 different parties. So one party will say, hey, what about A? One party will say, okay, what about B? And we find something that's a happy medium between them. So I've had great success with option generation.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because just this morning I got feedback on a report that I had written, and it went, I was working for one side, it went to the court, but I always make sure I'm being balanced. Money's balanced. It's never just one side gets everything. And the fact that the judge loved it so much and kind of admonished the other side for not considering it, because their client's situation was considered in the entire proposal. It made it more interesting when a judge is saying this is reasonable. Like these are good options, because they are looking at everybody's needs, the children in both parties. It's a win-win.
Absolutely. And it's so nice when judges back you up, when judges say, yeah, this is a great option, because it really helps that settlement. And I know I do a lot of work in the Central East area, and our judges are phenomenal about that. You know, they're really great about guiding the parties to what they think is reasonable and what they think would happen at a trial or a motion, so that the parties aren't wasting time and money.
Absolutely.
I always say to my clients, I would much rather that you put that extra 10K into your kid's RESP than you paid to us. We have lots of clients. We've got clients lining up the door. We want you and your family at the end of the day to be happy and healthy, and to be able to move forward, and to be able to see each other at, your kid's wedding and not absolutely hate each other.
Well, this process shouldn't destroy the family. It should be just creating a new path forward for the family to operate. That's all we're doing, is creating a new operating model. We're not destroying the family.
Absolutely. And it's so refreshing to have counsel and professionals that feel that way, because there are so many lawyers who come to the table, and, you know, we call it the old school, where it's a, you know, the art of war. That's what we're doing.
Mhm.
And it really does not take into consideration the fact that these are real human beings and real people. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the definition, importance, key principles. What do you got for me?
Jonathan, do you want to start us out?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, option generation is, you know, from a psychological point of view, is something that's been actually very, very well studied because, you know, this kind of social psychology information is used in so many different fields. You know, they use it in marketing, they use it in family law, they use it in education, public health. You know, the basis of option generation is something called psychological flexibility, where people have the ability to hold on to different competing ideas in their head at the same time, and kind of pick the one that's best for them. Some people are really naturally good at doing this, and other, you know, they have a inborn and developed personality that supports flexibility. They, you know, when they learn new information, they accommodate it and use it to influence their old beliefs and maybe change those beliefs to update them. And then some people are just not very flexible, and we've all, you know, had members of our family or friends or colleagues or clients that are less psychologically flexible. We call them rigid people. Rigid people, you know, tend to have a lot of difficulty changing their mind based on new information, often get stuck in a like circular logic loop. And those are people that option generation can be really helpful to get them out of that psychological rigidity and get them um, to consider other options, right? So this is a process where the professionals and the clients are coming up with, okay, we have a problem with the parenting schedule. Okay, what are all the options that we could possibly think of to come up with a solution for that? And the reason why it's helpful, I think, is because it kind of gets people out of positional bargaining, where they're, you know, thinking, well, I'm only going to agree to a 50-50 schedule. Well, there might be other options that you would be able to consider if we put everything on the table and looked at it all. So, yeah, I think it's a really important part of any family law process, and I don't think it's given the attention and the focus that's needed to actually make it, you know, as useful as it could be in our system. What are your thoughts, Carrie? How would you define it?
You know, I really liked when you said the word position. So the simplistic way of describing option generation is a position, which is something we see quite a bit in court, is there's only one solution. There's no other way to resolve the problem. But when we option generate, we can have 50 possible solutions. And sometimes what we're doing is we're looking at one party's options and we're looking at another person's options. And then magically, as everybody is watching this, they can see how melding of options can come together to create something very special that absolutely works for their unique family. And I think that's something that we always need to keep in mind, is that option generation allows us to give a concierge service to our clients where we're saying, this fits your family, this fits your situation. So I think that's a really important factor about why we want to look at and do option generation.
That's really insightful, guys. I'd never heard the term psychological flexibility versus rigidity, but it really does encapsulate what the underlying problem is. So why don't we go to our next poll, which is, which technique do you find most effective for generating options? So A, we have brainstorming. B, we have mind mapping. C, we've got a SWOT analysis. I've never actually heard of a SWOT analysis. I'm going to learn as well today. And D, others specify. So that's really interesting. It's funny because I don't actually know the technical terms for some of these things. I'm sure I'm aware of the different variations, but it'll be great today to learn the technical terms. And I was really interested, Jonathan, when you said there have been lots of studies. I may have to hound you send you an email after this to get those studies, because you know, the psychological kind of background of why people do things is really interesting. And as lawyers, the more you can understand about the human psyche and personalities and how, you know, people take in information, how they process information, what they do with that information, it's really helpful to understand your clients and where you can assist them in moving forward with option generation.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
I
you want,
totally
you
agree.
want,
Yeah.
and you want to keep some of those key factors, like when even when we're going to talk more about each one of these that we have up here on the option generation, but you know, you want to keep some key factors in mind. You want people to think outside of the box. So that's that creativity piece that we want people to be aware of. We want people to be open to all possibilities. And I think we've talked a lot about openness today and seeing that. And then also you want everybody to be client-centered. You want to focus on the needs and the interests of the clients, not on their positions, but on their needs, goals, interests. It's really an important factor when we're doing option generation and grabbing onto those key factors.
Excellent. So why don't we see what the audience has to say? All right, brainstorming, 78%, mind mapping, 6%, SWOT analysis, 11%, and other. So take it away. Why don't you guys educate us? I'm really excited to hear about this part.
There's so much here. It's absolutely fun. So there are lots of techniques out there, and we're gonna dive into each one of them. A really quick overview of each of them before we do a deeper dive. So brainstorming is the idea of free-flowing ideas, and there's no judgment. I always like it when if we're doing team meetings and we're in the collaborative setting, one of the fun things about brainstorming is that we can either, if we're in a Zoom meeting, we put a white piece of paper up and we just start jotting them down. If we're in an in-person meeting, we get large pieces of paper and we put them up on the wall and we stick them all over the room. We've had that in the past. And the thing is, the idea here is that you're just going to do a lot of free-flowing ideas. Some that you're going to throw out are going to be really crazy. I usually like to start off with a really crazy idea like, okay, person A gets everything and you get nothing. There's one. That's an option. The other person gets everything and you get nothing. That's option number 2. We win the lottery, we split it, and everybody goes their separate ways and everybody's happy. These are all options. And we find that sometimes when you start off with something really crazy and really fun, people start to relax and they start to just calmly saying, well, you know, what about if you kept the house and, you know, I did this with my pension? Or what if I kept the cottage, you kept the house, and we sold this property? Like they start getting really, really interesting and they get really creative, and you can see the people working together. So that's a great part about brainstorming is you get to just go completely crazy. Mind mapping is more about visualizing the connection between ideas. So we're going to take one idea. So it might be client A is going to keep the house. So let's connect all the things that go with that. So that might be connecting parenting time. That might be location of where people are going to live. We're going to connect in there, you know, the finances. Is the person having the financial flexibility to stay there? We're going to start doing that kind of mapping out of all of it. And then the next one is SWOT. And I'm going to let Jonathan talk about SWOT because I've been talking too much.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm not sure where the term SWOT came from, but I've been exposed to a lot in strategic planning when I'm on a board. And what they want to do is look at, you know, the organizational health. Where is it going? So it looks at the SWOT. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat. So every time you make a proposal, you're looking at what are the strengths of that proposal. So going with the example Carrie just gave, what are the strengths of keeping the house in the family? So one, it might be, well, the house is near the kids' school. Another is that you won't have to pay realtor fees and land transfer tax and whatnot to sell the house. 3, it might be like easier for the parent who's staying there just to keep all their stuff in the house and not have to move. So there's you're looking at the strengths and what are the weaknesses? Well, maybe one person having the home means it's harder for the other person to afford a home of their own. Because they're going to have trouble getting a mortgage, or maybe maybe the weakness is that the parent who wants to keep the home can't afford it. So you're looking at analyzing each of the proposals, each of the options in a thorough way to see, what are the opportunities. The opportunities might be good things that could happen in the future if you keep the house. Like maybe you can pass it on to your kids. We have a lot of I work a lot in rural areas, and in rural areas, people often buy homes that their family has owned, and they want to keep it in the family. So that might be an opportunity to pass on the home to future family members. And then the last one would be threats. What are potential future issues that might arise if you pick one option over the other? And the important thing about this analysis is to help getting the clients into the sort of mindset of critically analyzing each of the threats instead of narrowly interpreting them through their lens of what I call cognitive distortions or cognitive biases. Things like, oh, my ex wants to screw me, and that's why she wants to keep the matrimonial home, or the other parent wants to take the kids away from me because they want a shared parenting schedule, something like that. Those are cognitive distortions that can really negatively impact the way your client sees the options. And so having a SWOT analysis gives them the critical thinking skills to overcome those cognitive biases, like things like confirmation bias, where they come into the negotiations with a preset belief about the other person. The other person's evil. They just want to steal all my money. They just want to take the kids away from me. And when you develop all these options and get them to critically analyze those options, you're working very actively to overcome these cognitive biases that clients will often demonstrate in negotiations, and help them see other options, right? They don't have to be stuck in their one position if they can look at the other options and analyze them critically and find out, what's the best option for me. So I think it really, it dials up the resolution on the options you're generating so people can really, really understand them, instead of just saying, hey, why don't we try sharing the pension? You're not really understanding what consequences might be for sharing the pension in the future. So that's my those are my thoughts on SWOT analysis. Carrie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that? Did I miss anything?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that all of these can go together. So it's not just you doing one technique and one technique only. There is a melding of all of the techniques that kind of go on at the same time. So while you're brainstorming, you may end up doing some mind mapping. And then while you're doing that, you're analyzing your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. You're doing all of these things in conjunction. It's not one or the other. You're usually working all of them in conjunction with each other. But having said that, there are also some steps that you want to be aware of as we're doing some of these things. So, and I know everybody loves coming to these things and getting some steps, like, okay, how do I actually do this? The theories are great.
Carrie, give it to me. Step 1, 2, 3. I love that.
You want the full meat. Okay. So if we're going to look at brainstorming, I'm a big lover of brainstorming. I think it's so much fun. So just keeping in mind, it's a group activity. So it's a technique that you're going to do together. This is not one person going, okay, I'm going to brainstorm and hear all of my ideas. Please accept them all. That's, lovely. We want people to have some ideas coming in, but it really is a group activity. So the very first thing that you want to do is you want to set a clear objective. So that objective may be something like, how are we going to resolve an equalization payment? How is that going to get paid? What is it going to look like? So that might be our objective. And then we're going to encourage the clients to participate. You know, sometimes, like I said earlier, clients are a little shy. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to be the first to speak. So we may, as the professional team, either the lawyers, better coming though from a neutral first of us throwing out an idea. And that's usually when I'll throw out something crazy. Like, well, you win the lottery and you pay it that way. There's the easiest, simplest way to do it. We don't have to be very creative. It just gets done. So, but by doing that, by us as professional team throwing something out there, it gets the ball rolling. It gets the juices running. So we want to do that. We want to make sure their third step is that we're recording all of our ideas. And that we're not just recording one or two, we're recording all, including the crazy ones. You've got to record the crazy ones because it's really funny. Sometimes out of the crazy things, a little gem appears where somebody goes, I know this is on the crazy sheet, but I kind of like this and can we tweak it? So you want to make sure you're writing down and recording all of those ideas. And then what you want to do is you're going to evaluate and refine each one of these ideas. There's going to be some that you're going to go, nope, this is an absolute no, and everybody's going to agree to it. Some people may be laughing about it. It is a great way to get people looking at the same problem from the same side of the table. They're not coming at each other. They're trying to resolve it together. So that's a really nice part of this. And as we're evaluating and refining, I find that a lot of clients will say, well, this won't work, and here's why it won't work. And then somebody else is saying, oh, I didn't consider that. Or wait a second, what if we added this from this option over here and we take and tweak it from that option over there? That's evaluating and refining the options. It's a great technique. Clients seem to like it. They find those meetings high value. The other thing that's really nice, it's their agreement. It's things that they want to do. It's not us imposing it on them. And we have found that clients that come up with their own agreements are more likely to follow those agreements because it's theirs. And that's a really big thing. It's about them having some control and process, which is a big deal. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, a couple of things I would add to your already excellent description of option generation is it doesn't necessarily have to start in the meeting. What I would do with clients, both for mediation and for collaborative, is to ask them before the meeting, hey, these are the topics that we're going to come up with and have to reach an agreement on. Can you come up with 5 ideas of how you'd like to see these resolved? And that really gets them out of that mindset of positional bargaining where they're like, no, I'm only going to accept 50-50, or I'm only going to accept not paying spousal support, whatever the positional bargaining is, because then they have to come up with other options. So get them in the mindset early and get those wheels spinning so that, you know, when they're commuting to work, when they're making dinner, you know, when they're in the shower, they're starting to think, oh yeah, maybe this might be a better option than you know, the position I was taking before. And then you know, I think that's where collaborative really shines, because you can support the clients very actively while they're trying to come up with options. And if you find one client is getting stuck, it might be a good idea for the neutrals or that person's lawyer to have a little breakout room and say, hey, what's going on? I noticed that you're having a difficult time coming up with these options, and kind of get to the bottom of what is acting as a barrier to them, you know, coming up with options. Maybe there's an emotional issue that they're upset about, or maybe they don't trust in the process. Maybe they don't trust their ex. Maybe they don't trust the professionals. Let's find out what it is and resolve that issue so we can get back to the drawing board and figure this out. That would be kind of one approach that I would recommend people take.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it. One of the other things to keep in mind when you're doing option generation, one of the things that I really like about it is your clients end up feeling heard. it's one of those things where because everybody's having their voice, everybody's having their say, is your clients are ending up going, I've had a part of this, so I'm being heard. And they don't feel so dismissed in the process, or it's just one person running all over the process. So it is another nice part about doing these steps. Having
And,
said,
you know, Carrie and I have used this technique a few times to help resolve conflict. So what we do is if the parties are in a lot of conflict, they're fighting all the time, they're yelling at each other, you know, the kids are being exposed. Carrie and I and the lawyers will have a meeting with the clients to say, okay, let's come up with all the options for resolving or reducing or eliminating conflict while the process is going on. So we'll get, you know, as Carrie already said, if the clients come up with some ground rules on how to function while they're still living together, while they're negotiating their separation agreement, if they come up with those rules themselves, they're more likely to follow them. So you want to say, okay, what are all the things that we can suggest to help you guys manage conflict and reduce it and even eliminate it while the negotiations are going on? And they'll come up with a list, and then we'll send that list out to them and say, okay, we all agreed to these rules, and that you know, we'll follow these rules while the negotiations are on, and that will help when you're in the room actually negotiating the issues. You won't have as many of those emotional issues coming up and interfering with the process.
All right, team. There's so much. We can spend so much more time on this topic, but I think we should move on to our next poll. So, oh, there we go.
look at that.
What do you think is the biggest challenge in generating options in collaborative family law? Power imbalances, emotional conflicts, lack of creativity, resistance to change, or other?
Oh, we need an all of the above button.
Can we also add the client did not have breakfast that morning? Because that has actually happened to me one time. We stopped with them and they were happier after that.
Yeah. And those biological issues are not insignificant when you're planning your meetings, right? So, you know, if you are going to have an option generation meeting, make sure you're not scheduling it around lunchtime when the clients are getting hungry and maybe a little antsy about eating, or you know, don't have like an 8-hour meeting and have the option generation in hour 7, because clients are going to be exhausted and less creative and more irritable by that point. Or if the clients have just had a major blow up at home before the meeting, maybe address that first so that they can kind of be more open to generating options, because if they've just been yelling and screaming and insulting each other, they're less likely to even hear the other person's options as they're generating as good options. You know, it doesn't really matter the value of the option. It's the person who's saying it that they're really angry with, so they're not going to listen. So I think that's an important point that you made there.
Yeah. I also think just general readiness, you know, some people, we've always talked about, you know, some people are at this place in their process of the separation, and other people are way back here. And so if you don't have people that are in the same place when we're getting into doing option generation, we're not going to be quite as successful, I don't think, just simply because the other person's readiness just isn't there yet. And I think that becomes an important part of this.
Absolutely.
You might even want like the clients to come up with the crazy idea first, right? Like, and that will help kind of lighten the mood and get their creative juices flowing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I like when the clients are creative.
I do. The more you can get the clients engaged in the process and, you know, understanding that, you know, it is important, but you do have to take a step back from the conflict, the better your results are going to be. So let's see the results of our poll. What do people think? All right, emotional conflicts. The first one, I would agree. It's probably one of the bigger ones. Power imbalances at 24%, resistance to change at 19%, lack of creativity at 7%, and then other at 4%.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges we have related to those categories?
Absolutely. Well, they're all challenges.
Carrie's like, it's all bad.
There you go.
It's
They're all
bad.
challenges. They're all bad. You know what, though? I don't think they're all bad, because when we're looking at all of this is, it kind of comes into each one of our realms. So some of these, when I look at and the emotional stuff, it is, so important that we have our family professional on the file to deal with those emotions that are underlying. We talked about in our last presentation about a Kirby vacuum cleaner. And it's not always about the vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner becomes a symbol, and it's the emotional things that underlie that. And that's when I look at Jonathan and I'm like, Jonathan, deal with the vacuum.
Isn't it nice when you can
for
just say
sure.
to Jonathan, this is your problem now, figure it out?
Yeah, it really is. It's great.
Poor Jonathan, I've done that to him so many times.
So have I, Michelle.
Yeah, I think a couple other challenges that aren't on this list are one is like a psychological challenge called anchoring. Do you both know what anchoring is?
Explain to us.
I think yes,
Okay,
but
so
go ahead.
the best way to explain it is with retail shopping, right? When someone says that an item is on sale, it's probably a lie. It probably isn't on sale. What they did was just before the sale, they raised the price to $100, and your opinion of the value of that item is anchored at $100. So when they offer it for 85, you're like, good Lord, I'm getting 15% off. This is incredible. I better go out and buy it. And my wife always says that we save money by spending money on things that are for sale. And I tell her, well, you still have to pay money for those things. You're not actually making money off those sales. But anyway, so
Jonathan, let
be
me explain to you girl math.
You can
Carrie,
talk to
we can do a
Danielle
whole
and
seminar
finish
on
straight.
girl math, but
That's right. So yeah, you have to be careful of anchoring. So that could be a real challenge to operate option generation if the client has an anchored view of spousal support or child support or the value of the home. How many times have we seen a client coming in saying, well, I know my house is worth 1.5 million, even though the realtors say it's worth $900,000, so that they're going to have a really hard time agreeing to anything lower than 900,000 because their anchor is 1.5 million. So dealing with anchoring can be a real issue, or it could also be an issue for parenting, right? If their anchored belief is, well, I should have 50-50, even though that was never the case during the relationship. I had a file not too long ago where the father was anchored at 50-50 schedule, even though mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was on leave from work and was still earning money, but she wasn't working. So she was available for the kids 24/7. And dad had a night shift job where he was gone from the house from, I think it was like 7 to 7 every weekday. So he wouldn't even been available for the kids during that time. So that anchoring issue can be a real challenge. And there's lots of other cognitive biases that can contribute to those problems as well. One is the availability bias. So that would be where you are biased based on the last piece of information you heard. So for example, I have a case right now where there's a dispute between the parenting schedule. Mom, this is a different case, but mom, full-time parent, father works outside of home, very busy schedule. And he heard from his buddy at work that all dads get 50-50. And so now he wants 50-50. So that's the last piece of information that he's heard, and that can influence his ability to generate options and reach an agreement. And I think Carrie and I have had other really good examples of that with what we call the Greek forest, where you have a family member or a friend who is in the peripheral of our clients, who are kind of advising them either to or not to agree to certain options. In fact, Carrie and I had a case where the client had an off-camera person in the room with them, and that person was kind of whispering in their ear to say, no, you shouldn't agree to this, you shouldn't agree to that. So that can be a real challenge, is dealing with those Greek chorus people. And generally, you know, I think I've mentioned before, our clients' emotional states are really important too. If they're coming to the meeting more anxious and stressed than normal, then it's going to be harder for their mind to open up to options, because one thing that happens when we get stressed is our anxiety causes us to not have access to our thinking brain. You know, we have our thinking brain and we have our emotional brain, and sometimes they compete for control. And when our emotional brain is in charge, it actually turns our thinking brain off. And so it's much harder for people to think through and problem solve, because problem solving all comes from your thinking brain. So we want to make sure that clients are well fed, they're well rested, that if you have a family professional or a family mediator who has like a social work or psychology background, that they're working with the clients to help manage that stress. Maybe they're doing like a deep breathing exercise before the session. Maybe they have a support person, maybe not in the room, but in the house, that they can go to and decompress with. Or maybe the best way to generate options is not while the two parties are either in the same room or the same Zoom room together. Maybe you want to separate them to bring their emotional level down a little bit, and then the neutrals. And Carrie and I have done this many times in various different cases, where the two of us are bouncing back and forth between the two breakout rooms to help come up with options and help the clients manage their emotions so that they're not interfering with generating options. And then also you want to make sure that the team members aren't creating a barrier to option generation. You know, if one lawyer in particular is too vigorously defending their client's position and not looking at options, then it's going to be really hard to convince the client to generate options if their lawyer isn't on board either. So we want to make sure that we manage it. I also like Carrie's suggestion of writing everything down in a kind of nice visual way, because sometimes if there's too many options generated, people can get overwhelmed with the information and not remember things. So having a visual representation of each one is really good. And you might also want to take lots of breaks to help people spend a little bit more time considering whatever options have been placed on the table, because otherwise they might be too stressed and feel rushed and pressured. And people generally don't like making decisions when they're feeling super pressured. What other challenges or barriers have you seen, Carrie?
You know, I think some of the things that people end up with barriers, and I've said it before, is that fear again of the unknown, where they're really afraid that if I agree to this option, even though it sounds really good and it looks really good, what if it's wrong? What if it's the what if scenario that goes on through everybody's head? And we see that so often with money. Well, this sounds really great, but what if it's not great? What if there was a power imbalance, that what if they're still trying to manipulate me and now they've manipulated the entire team? So what if that is going on? And I think what ifs can be a really big problem. And I do think it's important for our clients to understand that when we're doing option generation, no matter which way you're going to do it, is that nobody has to make a decision in that moment. So they may say, you know what, I really, really like options 1 and 4. Those look really good to me, but I want to be able to talk to, you know, a financial advisor, or I want to be able to talk to a family member that can walk me through this and show me what I'm not seeing or not thinking of. They're still in a heightened emotional state when we're in these meetings. It's not like all of a sudden everybody just calms down and can be making rational decisions. So it's really important, I think, for people to be able to take those options away with them and say, okay, I feel good about this because of X, Y, and Z, or, I thought this looked really good in the meeting, but it doesn't, and here's why it doesn't. So I think that way we get better buy-in when people have that ability to say, oh, I don't have to make the decision right now.
And I
And
guess that's part of the SWOT analysis, Carrie, right? Taking that option and saying, okay, what are the strengths, the weaknesses? How do we, let's look at this critically and say, if this were what we're going to do, how is this going to look long term? Because that's really important. It's a really great analysis for both parties to do.
Yeah. And one of the things that another thing that we want to do when we start doing brainstorming, I love doing this, is going back to their goals and interests. What did you say were your goals and interests? What did the other person say their goals were and interests were? And we want to put them right up in front and center. So if your goal was, to keep the kids in their school and the other person's idea is to keep the kids in the school, well, you guys selling the house and having to move to different cities, it's not achieving that goal and interest. So we want to be able to look at those things because that helps us kind of formulate a really good option or options for them to be considering. So having that front and center so that they know why they're there, they get out of that combative state and they can see, well, this works and that works. And I like to tell clients, if an option only works for you, the other side will never agree to it. Their lawyer will not allow them to agree to it, just like your lawyer won't allow you to agree to a bad deal either. So you're going to have to make sure that this is something that you can both find acceptable, not necessarily fair, acceptable. And that's a really big thing for people to understand. It's what can I live with? What is that thing that 3 years from now, when you wake up on a Sunday morning, you're not waking up panic going, why did I make that decision 3 years ago? Instead, you're waking up going, geez, what am I going to do today? I feel good. That's the way that's the way we want to leave our clients anyways.
They're saying, Carrie, 3 years from now, people aren't going to wake up and say the vacuum. I'm really mad about that vacuum still.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully, we've made Jonathan like dig deep into the heart of the vacuum. And maybe we have to divide the vacuum. You can have the motor, they get the hose. Neither one's useful.
We'll send it back and forth in the kids' backpacks. How's that?
Exactly. Treat it like the family dog, and it's gonna go wherever they go.
Or take the King Solomon approach and just take a sword and slice it in half, and one person gets the left half of the mower, and the other person gets the right half.
Or we do it like you do with children. One person cuts it, the other person gets first choice of which half they want.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
I like that too. I think that's perfect. That's excellent.
Why don't we go on to our next poll? This has been an amazing discussion, guys. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been typing things as we go along.
I like that.
So I'm going to go on to our next poll. Which strategy do you think is most effective in overcoming challenges in option generation? A, mediation. B, emotional support from coaches. C, encourage flexibility. And D, other. Please specify. I'm sorry, we're taking a minute just to get the polls up and running. And actually, while that poll is getting up and running, I did want to maybe selfishly ask you guys, Jonathan, you brought up a really interesting point of, what happens when it's one of the professionals that may be impeding this process? Because I've run into that myself. How do you deal with that? Have either of you dealt with that? And what are your thoughts and suggestions?
My suggestion is to run and hide as much as possible. No. Yeah, I mean, that sort of situation comes up all the time. Lawyers and social workers and financial professionals can be very strong-minded, intelligent, lawyers, take courses on how to argue and debate and make their points. So it can be a challenge. And that's where I think having neutrals can be really helpful, because they're not on one side or the other, and they're going to see the middle ground, and they can really help to resolve conflicts, not just between the parties, but also between professionals, and to be the voice of reason, be the voice of compromise, be the voice of the middle ground when lawyers, for example, are taking hard positions. But it could also be the lawyer stepping in and making sure that the neutrals are being balanced, right? If the lawyers notice that one of the neutrals is being more favorable to one or the other client, then that might be a good opportunity to have a private conversation with that professional and just say, hey, listen, I've noticed this and this. How do you think we can resolve that issue? We talked about this a little bit in our last session on impasse, but there's different ways of phrasing things that can be either received positively or negatively. People are much more likely to react strongly to a negative comment than a positive comment. And so when you're addressing this issue with a professional, it's really important to approach with positive language. Say, hey, I've noticed this issue. How do you think we can resolve it? Or I'd really appreciate if I could have a conversation with you about, some of the issues that we've had in this case. Versus you need to step up and be a better person and stop being a jerk and don't do this and don't do that. That negative approach probably won't be well received from the other professional. They're going to get defensive, and when they get defensive, you've kind of lost them, and they're going to double down on their position no matter how unreasonable it is. So try to unarm them with a more positive approach, and be kind and supportive, and ultimately, as a neutral, you can only do so much, and there are some people that are more difficult to work with than others. But I think the neutrals have a very strong role to play in those kinds of situations. What do you think, Carrie? What are your thoughts?
You know what? I like it when, if we're in that situation, I like having a professional team meeting. And because I want to know the why. My big thing is why, like, why are we having
Great.
this issue? So, when it's a lawyer, like I've heard everything from, I'm not comfortable with this. Like, I think my client would be getting more in spousal support. I don't think we would ever be looking at it this way, especially when we have gender reversals where, maybe the wife is making more than the husband, or different factors. It's like, well, would we be looking at this way if the roles were reversed? So sometimes it's coming that I've had lawyers tell me, listen, I'm really worried that the behavior of my client, I'm going to get sued, or I'm going to get a complaint to the Law Society. Like, how do I deal with that? And sometimes just them telling us what their fear is, we can find a workaround where it's like, okay, I understand now where you're coming from and why this is happening. I think the why question just answers so much for us.
Absolutely. All right, let's thank you guys. That was really insightful. Let's get to the results of our poll. So what does our audience think about all of this? All right, so encouraging flexibility. That's great. That's the #1 pick from our audience. The next one is mediation. That's a really good option as well. And then the third one is emotional support from coaches. So all really great things. So why don't we talk a little bit about those strategies, guys?
Yeah. The solutions to the challenges, they're kind of interesting, that's for sure. And, always encouraging that openness, that flexibility. I think that's an important part. I think people have to understand that that old adage of, there's no stupid questions. Well, you can't come up with an option that's stupid. Like, all of the options have validity to them, no matter how crazy some of them might be. That's okay. Like I said earlier, some of the best stuff has come from the oddest options that we've generated, where all of a sudden it's like, wow, I never would have thought that way. I never would have gone down that road. So I think really is encouraging that, and letting people know on top of that, they don't have to make the decision in that moment. I think that takes away a lot of the scaries that go with option generation and them feeling like they must make a decision in that moment.
And I
Jonathan,
think,
what's yours?
yeah, adding on to what you're saying, Carrie, all of which I agree with, but flexibility should be a more important buzzword in our field. And I've seen the trend towards more flexibility increasing over the last few years. Even courts they have lots of other options in terms of how to resolve disputes between parties. The whole new kind of DRO, I think that's what it's called, dispute resolution officer approach, is a new one. And the massive bonus of collaborative and family mediation is you can do whatever the heck you want, right? You can set up the process however you want. There's so much flexibility in the process, and generating options is just one of the pieces of that. It's probably one of the most important pieces. And like clients often come into, as Carrie said before, they often come into these meetings with very clear pre-existing beliefs. They've seen Matlock on TV, or they've seen their friend or family member go through court, and they think they know what it's like. They're waiting for their you can't handle the truth moment in court, where the other person caves and they get everything they want. And we know that that's really unrealistic. And we want to dissuade them of that opinion and try to help them understand that the beauty of these alternative dispute resolution processes is that we have a lot of flexibility. There's no cookie cutter approach. And whatever ideas you had about how you're going to resolve this, throw them in the garbage. Let's come up with new ones. And just doing that can help the clients trust you as a professional. It can help them trust the process more thoroughly, and just help them feel comfortable that they're in good hands. And then while that process is going on, you have the family professional dealing with the emotional issues that are creating barriers to option generation. You have Carrie, the financial person, who is throwing out all these great financial options that maybe the lawyers wouldn't suggest, because if they suggested it, their client would be like, "Hey, why aren't you lawyering up for me? Why are you taking the other person's side?" So I think the neutrals have a very strong role to play in this, and ultimately, it is one of the best features of alternative dispute resolution, and because it's so popular in those settings and it's so successful, I think that the family court system is now looking at increasing the amount of flexibility they have on how to resolve cases, and I think that's really going to benefit our clients in the long run, and just society in general, because you've got less people spending less money on, more people spending less money on a process that results in a happy outcome for them, or at least, as Carrie said, an acceptable outcome. Maybe they're not 100% happy with it, but they can live with it, and getting clients out of that mindset, like, I have to get things this way. Well, no, there's lots of different ways you can get it. I think where it really shines through is often with spousal support too, because if you go to court, there's limited options on how the court's going to deal with spousal support. You come to collaborative or mediation, the world is your oyster.
Absolutely. All right. So let's get to the fun part, the case studies and examples. This is always fun to me because I live this on a daily basis, but it's really interesting to see how other people would have approached something that maybe there's a way I haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things about option generation, it is not always about what you can do, but it's also about what you can't do. And so one of the things that I do realize sometimes, so we have things where people are going, I want to keep the house, I want to keep the house, I want to keep the house. And I'm having to go through it. I'm like going, yes, it's an option for you to keep the house, but the money doesn't support it. And it's a really tough thing to be telling people that their option isn't going to fly because of it. And I see that a lot where, I've had matters recently where it's been a stay-at-home mom for a number of years and they want to stay in the house. When they bought the house, forever ago. Maybe they paid $400,000 for it. There's maybe $100,000 left on the mortgage, sometimes less, sometimes it's fully paid off. But now that same house is worth 1.4 million. And they're going to have to buy out the other side. Well, being a stay-at-home parent and then not having a job or having a minimum wage job or going back to school to retrain, it doesn't always work. The person who is paying support, your child support is going to come first, the needs of that child. So there may not be enough money left over for you to keep that house. Or maybe we're using the option of, well, your spouse would owe you spousal support, but maybe in order for you to keep the house, we're going to offset spousal support as a lump sum to allow them to afford to keep the house. So we can get really nice and creative doing those sorts of things. And we've done that on a lot of matters, a number of matters we have done that. I know other matters that I've worked on where we've gotten super creative but we've brought in other professions to help with creativity. So people that have their own business. I don't want to be a part of the business anymore. Buy me out of the business. Yeah, but if we do that, that might destroy the business. So how do we get you to stay the business? You don't have to be a part of the business, but how do we work that out? How do we work that into your separation agreement? How do we get a partnership agreement with your corporate lawyers? How do we put that together for you? So there's all of these things. It's not just black and white. We can get very creative in some of those things. How about you, Jonathan? What are some creative things you've had to do?
In the last poll, they talked about getting a coach to help with the emotions, and I think that's a really good option. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a coach, like a divorce coach. It could be a therapist, could be a reasonable family member, not the kind of family member that Carrie and I dealt with, who was hiding in the room and torpedoing our negotiations. But someone who's generally going to be supportive and help that person, reach an agreement. I think, another great strategy is we've said this many times, and I'll repeat it again because it's really important. Giving the clients time to consider the options is really, really helpful. Because sometimes there's an emotional barrier, and once they sleep off that emotions, it's kind of like like getting really anxious is a bit like being drunk, right? You can't reason with a drunk person, and you also can't reason with someone who's super anxious. So how do you deal with that? Well, you let them sleep off the alcohol and they wake up the next morning, and then you can reason with them. And the same with anxiety, right? Like anxiety kind of builds up, and in meetings people can be very, very anxious, and a lot of that is about fear. And they don't want to make a decision because they're afraid of that decision. Well, give them 24 hours or 48 hours to consider it. But also, sometimes it could be helpful to create some specific rules, some guardrails, so that they're following the process and not taking 3 months to decide. Say, okay, we're going to set up, give you an extra 48 hours to decide, and then we'll hear your decision by a certain time. I think those kinds of strategies can be really helpful.
Yep.
All right, guys, you guys have been amazing with your time. There is just one quick question, if you don't mind, before we go. I'm going to amend it a little bit because this one's a bit detailed. But how do you deal with an adult child who is exclusively on the side of one spouse?
Oh, that's interesting. See,
It's
for
kind of
me,
like that. What do we call them? The peanut gallery in the background.
the Greek chorus. See,
chorus.
That's when I think we need a strategy, and we all turn and look at Jonathan and go, "And?"
Yeah, so that would be a really important discussion to have at a professionals call, where you're getting the lawyers and the mediator or the financial person or the family professional to kind of strategize and problem solve together, generate options as a team, and then it might be something that you want to address with the clients in a separate meeting. Maybe individually, to make sure that you're set up for success during your meetings, and just say, like, this situation is negatively impacting our negotiations. How do we minimize that impact while this is happening?
Thanks so much. And I see Shannon anxiously waiting. I'm sorry, Shannon. I just had to get that
We
last
went over
question
time.
in.
No, that's okay. We actually have just under 15 minutes before the next presentation, so lots of time. It was really
You know
great.
me, I like to talk. I apologize.
No, it's all great stuff. We're learning lots. So thank you, Carrie and Jonathan, again for your presentation, and thank you so much for moderating, Michelle.